The police lights filled the basement before I could breathe. Red, blue, flashing across the concrete walls. My dad's hands were still on the stacks of cash. My mom didn't even look surprised. I was watching it all from my phone. And they didn't know. Hi, I'm Emma. I didn't think I'd ever say this out loud. Even now my stomach tightens thinking about that night. The way everything looked so normal for half a second. Just my parents at a folding table in the basement. The old lamp on. The dehumidifier humming. Nothing dramatic. Except the money. My money. The money they'd cried over. The money they told everyone had been stolen in a break-in. The money they said was gone forever. They were counting it. Calmly. Stack by stack. I remember my thumb hovering over the screen. I didn't know if I should call someone, or confront them, or just pretend I hadn't seen it. Because here's the part that still feels unreal. The only reason I was watching that camera feed at all was because they'd installed cameras in my room first. Hidden. Without telling me. To watch my every move. They thought I didn't know. I found one by accident. A tiny black lens tucked into the smoke detector. I remember standing on my bed, staring up at it, feeling something crawl up my spine. I didn't scream. I didn't confront them. I didn't even cry. I just stepped down slowly and pretended I hadn't seen it. That night I ordered my own cameras. If they wanted to watch me, fine. I'd watch back. It sounds calculated when I say it now. Like I was some mastermind. I wasn't. I was humiliated. That's the word. Humiliated in a way that makes you quiet. Because it wasn't just about privacy. It was about what it meant. They didn't trust me. They thought I was what? Dangerous? Sneaky? A problem to monitor? And I kept thinking maybe I'd done something to deserve it. Maybe I'd been distant. Maybe I'd been secretive. Maybe this was normal and I was overreacting. I don't know. When it's your parents, your brain bends itself trying to make it make sense. But the cameras went up in the basement first. Then the garage. Then the hallway outside their bedroom. I told myself it was for security. I told myself I wasn't spying. I just wanted proof that I wasn't crazy. I never expected to see them sitting at that folding table, counting cash that had supposedly vanished. The night they reported the burglary, my mom had cried in the kitchen. My dad had slammed cabinets. They said someone must have broken in while we were out. They said thousands were gone. Savings. Emergency funds. Things were tight now. They asked me if I'd noticed anything suspicious. I hadn't. I believed them. I even felt guilty. Like maybe I should have done more to protect the house. That's the part that stings. I felt bad for them. And there they were. Under the harsh yellow light. Organizing rubber bands around stacks of bills. Like it was just another Tuesday. I zoomed in on the feed. My dad said something I couldn't quite hear. My mom laughed. A small tight laugh. The kind she uses when she thinks she's being clever. And I realized. They didn't know I could see them. They had no idea the person they were trying to monitor was watching back. My chest felt hollow. Not angry yet. Just empty. I remember whispering to myself. What are you doing? Not to them. To me. Because once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. And once you know your parents are lying to you like that, you don't really go back to normal. I didn't call the police right away. I just kept watching. And that might have been the moment everything inside me shifted. Quietly. Irreversibly. Before all of that, before the basement, before the lights, before the cameras, our house felt normal. Not perfect. Just steady. We lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus. 2-story brick squeaky staircase. The same beige carpet my mom always said she was going to replace next year. My dad worked in insurance. My mom did bookkeeping from home for small local businesses. Nothing flashy. Just middle-class careful. We weren't affectionate people. But we weren't cold either. Dinner at 6. Plates rinsed before going into the dishwasher. My dad watching the news too loudly. My mom correcting small things under her breath. It was structured. Predictable. I used to think predictable meant safe. I was 22 when this happened. I'd moved back home after college to save money. That part already felt like a small bruise to my pride. Most of my friends had apartments with mismatched furniture and cheap wine glasses. I had my childhood bedroom with glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to the ceiling. But my parents said it made sense financially. Smart decision, my dad called it. He liked that word. Smart. I had a part-time marketing job and was freelancing on the side, trying to build something stable before moving out again. I paid a small amount of rent, bought my own groceries sometimes, tried to stay out of the way. That was the unspoken rule in our house. Don't be a problem. I followed it well. My mom and I had this polite distance. She'd ask about work while chopping vegetables. I'd answer. She'd nod. Conversations rarely went deep. Feelings weren't really our thing. My dad was different, more vocal. He liked knowing details. Who I was with, where I was going, when I'd be back. At first, I told myself it was just protective. I was living under their roof again. Maybe that came with rules. Sometimes he'd make jokes that felt almost like tests. Still talking to that guy from high school? You're not hiding anything from us, right? He'd smile when he said it, but he always watched my face closely after. I remember brushing it off, thinking I was being sensitive. There was one night, maybe 2 months before everything unraveled, when I came home later than usual. Around midnight. I'd been out with coworkers. My dad was sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, just sitting there. He said he couldn't sleep. I apologized for being late. He asked why I hadn't answered his text right away that I said my phone died. He nodded slowly, too slowly. Then he said, "You know we just worry about you." I said I knew, and I meant it. But something about the way he held eye contact made my stomach tighten. It wasn't anger. It was assessment, like he was measuring something invisible. Looking back now, maybe that was the red flag. Not loud, not dramatic, just off. But at the time I told myself every family has quirks. Every parent worries. And honestly, I did feel a little ashamed being back home. Like I'd regressed. So I overcompensated by being extra transparent. I'd tell them where I was going before they asked. Share small details. Volunteer information. Maybe I thought if I gave enough, they'd trust me automatically. I don't know. Money was always a sensitive topic in our house. My dad tracked everything in spreadsheets. My mom kept envelopes labeled in neat handwriting. They'd mention tight months even when nothing seemed wrong. When the supposed burglary happened, they said the cash that was stolen was emergency savings they kept at home. My dad said he didn't trust banks fully. He liked having control. I remember feeling embarrassed that we even kept that much cash in the house. But I didn't question it. Why would I? They'd never given me a reason not to believe them. At least not one big enough to notice. And when they told me they were installing security cameras after the break-in, it felt reasonable. Responsible. My dad explained it over dinner. Just in common areas, he said. Garage, backyard, entry points. He looked at me when he said it. I nodded. I even said it was a good idea. I didn't know then that he'd already ordered more than that. I didn't know that my bedroom had apparently become an entry point. Sometimes I wonder if I missed something obvious. Like maybe there were signs in the way they whispered when I walked into a room. Or how my mom would ask oddly specific questions about my schedule. Or maybe I'm rewriting it now because I know how it ends. I don't know. Have you ever looked back at something and tried to find the moment it shifted? But everything feels blurry? That's what it's like for me. Because before the smoke detector, before the tiny black lens, before I realized I was being watched, I genuinely thought we were just a slightly tense, slightly overprotective, normal family. And maybe that's why it hurt so much. Because the fall wasn't from chaos. It was from something that looks stable. And that kind of collapse is quieter. You don't hear it coming. I didn't find the camera because I was looking for one. I found it because the smoke detector was blinking. Just a faint red pulse. Slower than normal. I was lying on my bed scrolling, half asleep, when I noticed it out of the corner of my eye. At first I thought the battery was dying. So I stood up, dragged my desk chair over and climbed onto the bed. I remember feeling annoyed. Not suspicious. Just annoyed. I reached up to twist the cover off. And that's when I saw it. Not wires. Not dust. A tiny glossy black dot sitting behind the vent slits. It looked intentional. Too smooth to be part of the alarm. My stomach dropped in this slow sliding way. I didn't even fully understand what I was looking at yet. I just knew it wasn't supposed to be there. I stared at it for a long time. Like if I waited, it might explain itself. I got down, grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight and shined it directly into the slits. The reflection hit back. A lens. I stepped off the bed carefully, like the floor might crack under me. My first thought wasn't anger. It was confusion. Maybe it's part of a new security system, I told myself. Maybe Dad upgraded things. Maybe I'm being dramatic. But then another thought came, quieter and colder. Why wouldn't they tell me? I stood there in the middle of my room. My childhood room. Posters still taped inside the closet door. Old trophies on the shelf. And suddenly it didn't feel like mine. I didn't confront them that night. I went downstairs for water like everything was normal. My dad was watching TV. My mom was folding laundry. I studied their faces. Were they acting different? Did they know I knew? My dad looked up and asked if I was okay. I said yeah. Just tired. He nodded and went back to the screen. I waited for guilt to flicker across his face. It didn't. That's when something shifted from confusion to unease. The next morning, I Googled the brand name printed faintly on the inside of the smoke detector casing. It wasn't just a smoke detector. It was a camera with remote access. I sat there at my desk staring at the product description. Monitor activity from anywhere. Discreet design. Real-time alerts. I don't remember breathing for a few seconds. I kept thinking there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe they installed it temporarily after the break-in and forgot to mention it. Maybe they meant to tell me. So I tested something. That afternoon I changed clothes slowly in my room. Paused halfway. Looked directly at the detector. I don't know why I did that. Maybe I wanted to see if someone would react. Maybe I wanted proof. At dinner my mom asked if I was feeling okay. She said I seemed off. My dad watched me longer than usual. I felt exposed. Not just physically. Emotionally. Like I'd accidentally stepped into a spotlight. That night, I covered the smoke detector with a scarf and went to sleep. The next morning the scarf was gone. Folded neatly on my desk. No one said a word. I remember standing there holding the fabric, feeling like the air had thinned. That was the moment the possibility became reality. They were watching me, and they knew I knew. But instead of talking about it, we were all pretending. The pretending might have been the worst part. I started noticing small things after that. My dad asking oddly specific questions about phone calls I'd taken in my room. My mom mentioning when I'd stayed up late. Once my dad joked, "You really should organize that closet." I hadn't told him I cleaned it. I laughed like it was nothing. But inside something was unraveling. I considered confronting them directly. I even rehearsed it in my head. Why is there a camera in my room? But every version ended the same way. With them turning it around on me. If you weren't doing anything wrong, why are you upset? We're protecting you. Our house, our rules. And maybe they would have been right. I was living there. I was technically an adult. But still, there's something about your bedroom. Supposed to be yours. I didn't want a fight I couldn't win. So instead I ordered my own cameras. Not fancy ones. Just small indoor security cams I could monitor from my phone. I told myself it was for safety. That's what I typed into the justification box in my mind. But really, I wanted to see what they did when they thought no one was watching. I installed the first one in the basement. Because that's where they kept most things. Old boxes. Important documents. The safe. The safe that supposedly had been emptied during the burglary. I didn't expect to find anything. I just needed to feel less powerless. Less observed. The day the cameras connected to my phone, I felt this strange mix of guilt and relief. Was I crossing a line? Probably. Was I already on the other side of one? Definitely. And I kept asking myself one question over and over. If they trusted me, why would they need to watch me? But I didn't have the answer yet. I only had a growing sense that something wasn't just about safety. And the longer I stayed quiet, the more the silence felt like a ticking clock. The first few days after I installed my cameras, nothing happened. And that almost made me feel stupid. I'd check the basement feed randomly during work breaks. Just old boxes. The treadmill no one used. The humming dehumidifier. Completely ordinary. Part of me hoped I'd overreacted. That maybe this would all fizzle out and I'd quietly remove my cameras and we'd never talk about any of it. But then there was that night. It was around 10:30 p.m. I was in my room, door closed, pretending to watch a show while really just scrolling through the camera app. I don't even know why I opened the basement feed. Habit, I guess. The light was on. That was unusual. The basement lights were rarely on at night unless someone was doing laundry. I tapped the screen. My parents were sitting at a folding table in the middle of the room. And there was cash on it. Stacks of it. At first my brain didn't process what I was seeing. It just looked like paper. Then my dad started organizing the bills into neat piles. My mom was counting out loud under her breath. I felt my pulse in my ears. Because the burglary had happened 3 weeks earlier. 3 weeks of tension. 3 weeks of my dad complaining about lost savings. 3 weeks of my mom sighing about canceled plans. They told relatives, friends. Even our neighbor Mr. Jensen had come over to help check the locks after it happened. They had cried. And there it was. Neatly stacked. Unstolen. I zoomed in until the image blurred. I just stared. Maybe this was different money, I told myself. Maybe they found some of it. Maybe insurance paid out. Maybe. But my dad said something that cut through all the maybe. Good thing we moved it before she noticed. I froze. My mom laughed softly. She didn't suspect a thing about the burglary. I think that was the moment something inside me went quiet. Not shattered. Not exploded. Just quiet. Because it wasn't just the money. It was the performance. The fake break-in. The way they'd included me in the story. The way they'd asked if I'd seen anything suspicious. Like I was part of the investigation. My stomach turned. I replayed the clip twice to make sure I heard it right. Before she noticed. Before I noticed what? That the money existed? That they were hiding it? Or that they were watching me? And then another thought slipped in, colder than the rest. Were they setting me up? I didn't want to think that. But why stage a burglary? Why lie about stolen cash? And why install a camera in my bedroom without telling me? I sat on my bed, phone in my hand, trying to line the pieces up in a way that didn't point back to me. I couldn't. The next day at breakfast, my dad mentioned how hard it's been financially since the theft. He said it casually, like small talk. I looked at him differently. I wondered how long he'd been practicing that tone. My mom asked if I'd heard any updates from the police report. I said no. Because there wasn't one. I checked. They never filed an official burglary report. They told people they did. But there was no case number. That's when the humiliation started creeping in. Not loud. Just heavy. Had they been telling people I took it? Was that the real reason for the cameras? Was I the suspect? I thought about the way my dad had asked me if I was hiding anything. The way he'd sat in the dark that night I came home late. The way the scarf disappeared from the smoke detector. I felt exposed in ways I couldn't even explain. Like I'd been living inside a quiet accusation. And the worst part? I started questioning myself. Did I ever say something that made them doubt me? Did I seem irresponsible? Did I somehow earn this? I hated that my mind went there. I hated that even with proof on my phone, I was still trying to justify them. That's what humiliation does. It makes you shrink first. I didn't confront them that week. I just kept watching. More clips. More late-night basement sessions. Sometimes they'd move the money into a locked box. Sometimes they'd count it. Once my mom said, "If she ever asks, we'll just say the police are still investigating." They'd already built the script. And I was a character in it. I stopped sleeping well. Every sound in the hallway felt amplified. I started changing clothes in the bathroom instead of my room. I felt monitored, judged, studied, and underneath all of that, disposable, like they were preparing for something. I didn't feel rage. I felt small, smaller than I had in years. I remember sitting in my car one afternoon in a grocery store parking lot, staring at the steering wheel thinking, if your own parents don't trust you, what does that say about you? And I know that sounds dramatic. But in that moment it didn't feel dramatic. It felt real. I think that was my lowest point. Not when I saw the money. Not even when I realized they'd lied. But when I realized they might have been building a story where I was the problem. And I didn't even know why. I wasn't angry yet. I was hurt. And hurt makes you hesitate. It makes you doubt your own reality. But at some point, hurt turns into something else. And I could feel that shift coming. Slow. Cold. steady. I didn't wake up one morning feeling powerful. It wasn't like that. It was quieter. More like, I got tired of feeling small. There's a point where the hurt stops being sharp and just becomes dull and constant. And that dullness? It gives you space to think. I started documenting everything. Not dramatically. Not obsessively. Just carefully. I saved the basement clips. Backed them up to a cloud account they didn't know I had. I recorded timestamps. Snippets of audio. The exact words. Good thing we moved it before she noticed. I wrote it all down in a notes file. Felt strange doing that. Like I was building a case against my own parents. But I kept reminding myself, I didn't start this. They did. I also did something else. I tested them. One afternoon at lunch, I mentioned casually that I was considering moving out sooner than planned. I said I'd been saving aggressively. My dad's fork paused midair. Oh, he said. Too neutral. My mom asked how much I'd saved. The question felt heavy. I shrugged and gave a vague answer. That night, I checked the basement feed. The money box was open. They were counting again. My dad said, if she leaves, we need to make sure everything's accounted for. Accounted for. Like I was a variable in a math problem. That's when the clarity came. Not loud. Not emotional. Just clear. They thought I was capable of stealing from them. Or they were preparing to accuse me of it. Either way, I was already guilty in their minds. And if they were willing to fake a burglary once, what stopped them from escalating? I started researching quietly. Tenant rights. Surveillance laws. Recording consent in Ohio. I didn't want revenge. I wanted protection. That's what I kept telling myself. There's this strange shift that happens when you stop trying to convince someone to see you correctly. You stop explaining yourself in your head. You stop rehearsing imaginary arguments. You just observe. I began watching them the way they'd been watching me. Patterns. Conversations. Who they talked to after counting money. My mom called Aunt Lisa one night and mentioned how stressful it's been since the break-in. Her voice sounded tired. Convincing. It hit me then. They weren't panicking. They were performing. And that realization did something inside me. It replaced the hurt with something steadier. I wasn't a daughter in that narrative. I was a liability. Maybe that sounds harsh. Maybe I'm being unfair. I still wrestle with that. Because they weren't monsters. They weren't screaming villains. They still asked if I wanted tea. Still reminded me to drive safely. That's what made it confusing. The normalcy. But normal people don't install hidden cameras in their adult daughter's bedroom and stage fake crimes. At least, I don't think they do. I decided I needed outside perspective. Not friends. I wasn't ready for that kind of exposure. An authority. Quietly. I went to the local police station one afternoon after work. My hands were sweating so badly I almost turned around in the parking lot. I didn't march in accusing anyone. I just asked to speak to someone about surveillance laws. The officer I spoke to, Officer Ramirez, listened without interrupting while I explained. Carefully. Without dramatics. When I mentioned the hidden bedroom camera, his expression changed slightly. When I mentioned the staged burglary and the money on video, he leaned forward. He asked if there was an official report on file. I said no. He asked if I had proof of the cash and the conversations. I nodded. He didn't promise anything big. He just said, if what you're saying is accurate, that's serious. Serious. That word felt heavier than anything else. I left with instructions on how to formally submit evidence if I chose to. I sat in my car for a long time afterward, staring at my phone, at the app, at the basement feed. They were down there again, counting, planning, and I realized something that scared me a little. I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't doubting myself. I was calm, and maybe I shouldn't have been. Maybe I should have confronted them face to face like some brave daughter demanding answers. But I didn't trust that version of the story. I trusted documentation. I trusted timestamps. I trusted quiet action. Still, there was a small voice asking if I was going too far. They're your parents. Maybe they're just paranoid. Maybe you're misinterpreting. I listened to that voice. And then I replayed the clip. Good thing we moved it before she noticed. No, I wasn't misinterpreting. I wasn't crazy. I was being positioned. And I refused to stay in that position. so I submitted the footage. Not angrily, not impulsively, just steadily. And then I waited. It happened on a Thursday. I remember because the trash bins were still at the curb. I'd gone to my room early, said I had work to finish. My voice sounded normal. I made sure of that. Around 9:47 p.m., the basement light flicked on. I opened the app. There they were. Folding table. Lamp. Cash. Routine. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stepped into the bathroom and answered quietly. Emma? This is Officer Ramirez. My throat tightened. He said they were nearby. He asked if my parents were home. I said yes. He told me to stay upstairs. My heart started pounding so hard I thought I might throw up. I watched the screen. My dad was stacking bills. My mom was writing something down. Then, knocking. Loud. Sharp. The kind that doesn't ask permission. They both froze. My dad looked toward the basement stairs. Another knock. Louder. Police department. My mom's face drained of color. My dad stood up too fast. The chair scraped against concrete. I was still staring at my phone. I could hear movement downstairs. Footsteps overhead. The front door opened. Voices. Firm. Controlled. What seems to be the problem? My dad asked. Even now, I can hear how steady he sounded. Officer Ramirez asked about the reported burglary. My dad hesitated. Just a second. Then he said, yes, we had a theft a few weeks ago. The officer asked for the case number. Silence. My mom's voice this time. Softer. We were told it was being processed. Footsteps. Basement stairs creaking. I felt like I was outside my own body, watching everything from above. The officers came down into the basement. The camera angle caught their uniforms first. Then their flashlights. Then the table. The money. No one said anything for a moment. It was just there. Visible. Undeniable. Officer Ramirez looked at my dad. Would you like to explain this? My dad started talking. Something about recovered funds. Insurance confusion. Miscommunication. The words sounded scrambled. My mom tried to speak over him. I don't remember everything clearly after that. It moved fast. Questions. Tension. My dad's voice rising slightly. My mom saying my name. Emma. I froze upstairs. They didn't know yet. But they were close. One of the officers asked who else lived in the home. My dad said, our daughter. Officer Ramirez said, we've already spoken to her. Silence. Heavy. I felt it all the way upstairs. My dad's tone changed. Not angry. Just stunned. They asked about the cameras. About the bedroom surveillance. My mom tried to frame it as parental concern. Officer Ramirez said something about consent and legality. I remember gripping the bathroom sink so tightly my knuckles hurt. Maybe I shouldn't have done it. Maybe I should have talked to them first. Maybe this was too far. That thought hit me hard. Because downstairs I could hear my mom crying. And that sound, it almost broke me. I didn't want to hurt them. I just wanted the truth to stop twisting around me. The officers asked them to sit down. More questions. More silence. Eventually, one officer came upstairs and knocked gently on my bedroom door. I opened it. He asked if I was safe. I nodded. He asked if I wanted to come downstairs. I hesitated. Then I said yes. Walking down those stairs felt unreal. My parents looked up at me. Shock. Betrayal. Confusion. My dad said my name like it was a question. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stood there. Officer Ramirez explained that filing a false police report or staging a theft for insurance carried consequences. He mentioned unlawful surveillance. The words sounded official. Heavy. My mom kept saying, we were just trying to protect her. Protect me from what? My dad wouldn't look at me. Not once. And in that moment I realized something strange. I wasn't the one exposed anymore. They were. The officers didn't handcuff anyone. Not that night. But they documented everything. Photographed the money. Took statements. The performance was over. And I stood there in the middle of it, unsure if I felt victorious or hollow. Probably both. I still don't know if I did the right thing. I just know I couldn't stay silent. And silence had already cost me enough. The house felt different after that night. Not louder. Quieter. Like even the walls were unsure what to do with everything they'd heard. The officers left around midnight. No arrests. Just paperwork and warnings and a very clear explanation of what would happen if the investigation found insurance fraud or unlawful surveillance charges to be valid. My parents didn't speak to me while the police were there. They barely looked at me. After the door closed and the red and blue lights disappeared from the windows, we stood in the living room in this strange triangle of silence. My mom's mascara had smudged. My dad's shoulders looked smaller somehow. I expected yelling. Accusations. Something explosive. Instead, my dad said very flatly, "You went to the police." Not a question. I nodded. My voice didn't feel steady enough to use. My mom started crying again, but softer this time. Not dramatic. Just tired. "We were trying to protect this family," she said. That word. Protect. It sounded different now. I asked quietly, "From what?" Neither of them answered right away. My dad finally said, "You've been distant. Secretive. We didn't know what you were involved in." Involved in? Like I was running something criminal out of my childhood bedroom. I almost laughed. But it wasn't funny. It was sad. They'd built an entire narrative about me without ever asking a direct question. The burglary wasn't about money, I realized. It was about control. They moved the cash and staged the theft because they thought I might take it. Or because they wanted leverage. Or maybe they just wanted to see how I'd react. I still don't fully understand that part. And maybe I never will. The next few weeks were tense. There were formal interviews. Follow-up visits. The insurance company opened a review into the claim my parents had started but never finalized. Apparently, inconsistencies had already raised flags. The bedroom camera became a bigger issue than the money. Ohio law isn't vague about recording someone in a private space without consent. My dad tried to argue that it was his house. The investigator didn't agree. Eventually, my parents were required to remove all indoor cameras immediately. They were issued fines related to false reporting and improper surveillance. No jail time, but enough legal consequence to leave a mark. Extended family found out. That part spread fast. Aunt Lisa stopped calling as often. My grandmother sent me a short text that just said, "I hope you're safe." I moved out within a month. Not dramatically. No screaming exit. Just boxes. A small apartment across town. A used couch from Facebook Marketplace. My parents didn't try to stop me. They didn't help either. The last night I slept in that house, I lay in my old bed staring at the ceiling where the smoke detector had been replaced with a plain one. No blinking light. Just quiet. I expected to feel triumph. Instead, I felt grief. Because even if what I did was necessary, it still fractured something. We talk now. Carefully. Holidays are polite. Conversations stay shallow. The word camera has never been said again. They've never apologized directly. Not in a clean, satisfying way. My mom once said, "We all made mistakes." My dad said, "It got out of hand." That's as close as it's come. And maybe that's reality. Not every story ends with accountability speeches. Sometimes it ends with distance. I don't hate them. That's the strange part. I understand fear. I understand wanting control when things feel uncertain. What I don't understand is why they never trusted me enough to just ask. Maybe they thought watching was easier than listening. I still replay that sometimes, wondering if there was a version of this where we sat at the kitchen table and talked instead of installing cameras and calling police. But that version doesn't exist. This one does. And in this version, I learned something I didn't expect. You can love people and still hold them accountable. You can feel guilty and still be right. And you can leave without slamming the door. I don't feel small anymore. Not because I won, but because I didn't let myself be rewritten into someone I wasn't. That mattered more than anything else. I still check ceilings sometimes. Not because I think there's a camera. Just habit. It's strange what stays with you. For a while after I moved into my apartment, I kept my laptop camera covered with tape. I double-checked door locks. I'd pause before changing clothes even though I lived alone. Trust doesn't snap back into place just because you change addresses. It rebuilds slowly, like muscle after an injury. And sometimes it aches when the weather changes. I've thought a lot about what this story is actually about. On the surface, it sounds dramatic. Hidden cameras, fake burglary, police in the basement. But underneath all of that, it was about being seen incorrectly, about being watched instead of believed. There's a specific kind of pain in realizing the people who raised you don't see you clearly anymore. Or maybe never did. I don't think my parents woke up one day and decided to become villains in my life. I think fear crept in slowly. Assumptions stacked up. Silence filled the gaps where conversations should have been. And instead of asking me who I was becoming, they monitored me. Maybe control feels safer than vulnerability. Maybe it felt easier to suspect than to admit they didn't understand me. I've asked myself 100 times if I escalated things too quickly. If I should have confronted them directly. If involving the police crossed some invisible family line. I still don't have a perfectly confident answer. What I do know is this. When I found that lens in my ceiling, something inside me felt erased. Like my privacy wasn't just invaded, my character was questioned. And I couldn't live inside that version of myself. So I stepped outside of it. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just firmly. It's weird how strength doesn't always feel powerful. Sometimes it feels like shaking while you dial a number. Sometimes it feels like sitting in your car after speaking to an officer and wondering if you just destroyed your family. Sometimes it feels like signing a lease alone. Growth isn't glamorous. It's awkward. Uneven. There are days I miss the old version of our family. The predictable dinners. The illusion of safety. Illusions are comforting. Until they aren't. If there's anything I've learned, it's that trust isn't built through surveillance. It's built through uncomfortable conversations. Through asking instead of assuming. Through listening even when the answers scare you. I wish my parents had asked me what they were afraid of. I wish they had told me they were worried instead of trying to catch me doing something wrong. But I can't rewrite them. I can only decide who I become. And I've decided I won't love people in a way that requires watching them. I won't confuse control with care. And I won't shrink myself to fit inside someone else's suspicion. If you've ever felt misunderstood in your own home, if you've ever realized the people closest to you had a version of you that didn't match reality, I'm really curious. Did you confront it? Or did you carry it quietly? So that's my story, folks. If it resonated with you, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far Uncle Mickle's voice travels. Trust requires honesty, not hidden lenses.